"That's your rent now?" my daughter-in-law said, handing me a grocery list. I looked at my son, my own son, as he nodded like it was reasonable. 3 pages long, almond milk underlined twice. They stood in the kitchen I once owned, in the house I gave him, so I bought nothing on that list. Instead, I handed him a signed 30-day notice, mother to tenant. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The list was 3 pages long, and I hadn't even asked to live here. The grocery list was folded once, creased neatly, and left by the coffee pot like a passive offering or a trap. Ellie picked it up with the same care she once used for overdue books. It wasn't the first list Dana had left, but it was the first time it came with a sentence. "Just so we're even," Dana had said, her voice casual, breezy, as if it were a joke, as if Ellie wouldn't hear the barbed wire under the breathy smile. Ellie didn't respond then. She simply sat down, opened the list, and began to read. 3 pages, not scribbled reminders or shared needs. This was an itemized ledger. There were no pleases, no thank yous, just demands: organic eggs, unscented detergent, toilet paper, 4-ply, not store brand, almond milk underlined twice, and scrubbing bubbles for the downstairs bath, the one Ellie wasn't allowed to use. Because, as Dana once said, it's for guests. Ellie's knees ached just looking at it. Literally. The cold from last night's rain had settled deep in her joints. She shifted in the kitchen chair, adjusting her brace. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but watchful. Dana had already left for her Pilates class. Neil was working upstairs. The kids were at school. Ellie looked around. This had once been her house. The dining table, bought with her library overtime pay. The walls, painted the same week Neil got his learner's permit. Even the framed photo above the mantel, her and her late husband James holding a squirming 2-year-old Neil, was still there, though now outnumbered by Dana's minimalist decor, cream tones, brass candles, and a one-word art print that said "grateful" in lowercase. Grateful. Ellie let the word sit in her mind like a bitter taste. She hadn't asked to live here. After the fall and her knee surgery, the plan had been rehab and then her own place. Maybe a small rental, maybe assisted living if needed. But Neil had insisted, "Why waste money? Stay with us. We have the space." She'd agreed, thinking it temporary. A few weeks, 2 months at most. That was 8 months ago. And now her room was the smallest one. The pantry shelf labeled "Grandma's" was always suspiciously empty, and her presence had become a utility, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. She stared at the list again. A line at the bottom had been added in Dana's tight, efficient handwriting. "This is just the fair thing, Eleanor. You're here rent-free." It wasn't about the groceries, it was about ownership, about Dana's need to draw lines. Ellie's presence, once welcomed with warm blankets and Neil's soft promises, was now itemized into tasks, into to-dos. Neil had said something similar last week after dinner, as if rehearsed. "It's fair, Mom. I mean, you are living here rent-free." She hadn't argued, but that sentence had echoed louder than any slam of a cupboard or pointed sigh. She remembered the vows she'd watched Dana say to her son about support, patience, love in every form. It didn't stretch to mothers, apparently. Ellie stood and moved slowly toward the hallway closet. Her knees cracked like ice under thin boots. She pulled out her purse, unzipped the inner compartment, and took out a pen. She walked back to the table, sat down again, and laid the list flat. One by one, she crossed off the items: almond milk, toilet paper, eggs, baking soda. Then, underneath the last line, she paused. She looked at the empty white space below the list, and in calm, even handwriting, her librarian handwriting, she wrote, "Noted." Neil came down later, glanced at the folded list on the counter, and raised an eyebrow. "Mom, you good with this?" Ellie nodded slowly. "Of course," she said, smoothing the paper before sliding it across to him. "I understand completely." She turned away and opened the refrigerator door, not to get anything, just to let the cold air wash over her face for a moment. Ellie crosses almond milk off the list and writes one word underneath: "Noted." Dana only speaks to me when the oven's on. That way she can walk away. The oven timer chirped like a polite interruption. Right on cue, Dana's voice floated in from the kitchen. Could you grab the plates, Eleanor? Her tone was sweet, practiced, like a teacher addressing a student she didn't trust with scissors. Ellie wiped her hands on a dish towel and moved to the cabinet. The clink of ceramic echoed slightly louder in a kitchen that never truly felt hers. She handed the plates over. Dana didn't make eye contact. She never did when the oven was counting down. Ellie had started noticing the pattern weeks ago. Conversations only happened during active cooking. While the oven was preheating or the stove ticking beneath a simmering pan, Dana would toss words at her like seasoning, quick, flavorless, easy to walk away from. If Ellie ever tried to reply with more than a yes or no, Dana would glance at the timer and say, "Oops, gotta check that," and disappear behind steam and stainless steel. They never talked when the house was still, never when Ellie was reading on the patio or folding the grandkids' towels, only when there was a built-in escape. She noticed other things too, like how Dana now introduced her to guests with a laugh and a tilt of the head. "This is our little helper. She keeps the house running." Neil chuckled the first time she said it. He didn't see the way Ellie's hand stiffened around the dishcloth. Or maybe he did and chose not to. He was always so good at looking busy, tapping his phone, refreshing his emails. Present, but buffered. That night, over baked salmon and quinoa, Dana recounted how wonderful it was to have an extra set of hands. Ellie nodded politely and said nothing. She couldn't remember the last time anyone asked her what she wanted for dinner. "You've really blossomed," Dana had said to her brunch guests the weekend before, passing around mimosas while Ellie stood by the dishwasher. Now that she has purpose again, blossomed, like a houseplant taken out of storage, like a charity case. Ellie had once worked full-time while raising Neil in a two-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and one leaky radiator. She taught story hour at the public library, directed church recitals, and never once asked for praise. Her purpose had been stitched into every meal, every late-night math worksheet, every second-hand book bag patched with elbow grease and love. That night, while making tea, Ellie burned her thumb on the metal of the kettle's lid. It hissed against her skin, sharp and biting, and for a moment she almost gasped. But she didn't call out, didn't ask for help. She pressed her hand into her cardigan pocket and let the sting settle quietly, like so many others. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the dishwasher had finished, Ellie went to her room. In the bottom drawer of her nightstand, beneath a charger and crossword book, she found a manila envelope labeled in her late husband's handwriting. House title, original copy. She hadn't touched it in years. Neil had said he'd handle things. She had trusted him. Ellie didn't open it, just set it on the nightstand, in plain sight. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen. On Ellie's lap sat the unopened envelope. Next to her coffee was a grocery ad Dana had circled. "Buy one, get one paper towels." In the margin, "Grab these." Ellie moved it aside. She hadn't missed a mortgage payment in 34 years. She and James bought the house in 1983 with tax refunds and an aunt's inheritance. They raised Neil there, painted every wall, tiled the bathroom by hand, and planted lavender by the porch that still bloomed each summer. Now, she looked at the envelope. She was done being handed coupons. After James died, everything had blurred: the medical bills, the grief, the lawyer who suggested putting the house in Neil's name for security. A trust structure, clean and smart, they called it. Neil had promised, "This is still your home, Mom. Always." Always, she was starting to learn, had an expiration date. She stood by the stairwell one afternoon, out of sight but not out of earshot. Dana's voice drifted from the living room, sharp and clear through the phone. She was pacing, probably with her wine glass, as she always did when she felt important. "I'm telling you, once she's out, we can blow that wall open and finally get the open floor plan we want." Ellie blinked, her hand tightening around the banister. Out. Not gone, not moved. Out. Like spoiled milk, like something overripe and in the way. She didn't say anything that night, didn't ask questions, but the words stuck in her chest like pebbles in a shoe, irritating, inescapable. With each step she took around the house, she started hearing them on a loop. Once she's out. She retrieved a small spiral-bound notebook from her closet, the kind they used to hand out at library fundraisers. It had a faded sticker of an owl on the front. She tore that off. The first entry she wrote, March 4th, once she's out. Phone call, 3:18 p.m. Wine glass clinked mid-sentence. The next day, Dana said something about Ellie hogging the washer. Ellie added that too, March 5th. Your laundry is small. Just throw it in with ours. Tone irritated. Each note was written neatly, clearly, librarian style. She logged Neil's responses too, his noncommittal shrugs, his careful silences, his occasional, Dana didn't mean it like that. Explanations that never felt like defense, only deflection. By the end of the week, Ellie had 4 pages filled, words, glances, even how her name had changed. First Mom, then Eleanor, now often just a gesture or silence. On Saturday, Ellie stepped outside for air. The chill was sharp, but she welcomed it. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and stood by the mailbox, flipping through bills and a coupon booklet addressed to resident. That's when a voice called out from a white van parked by the curb. Mornin'. You must be the tenant. Ellie turned, blinking against the glare. A man in paint-splattered jeans and a clipboard was waving from the sidewalk. He motioned to the house behind her. I've got the estimate for the kitchen remodel. Dana said to come early. Her mouth went dry. She smiled politely. I'm just visiting, she said softly, but I'll let the owners know you stopped by. The man nodded, satisfied, and returned to his van. Ellie stood still for another moment, clutching the mail. The wind caught the corner of the coupon booklet and fluttered it open. Inside, almond milk on sale again. Ellie walks past a contractor at the curb who says, Oh, you must be the tenant. The guest room is now an office. My belongings are in plastic bins. The door was already half open when Ellie reached the top of the stairs. Light spilled into the hallway in thin bands, slatted through the blinds of what used to be her bedroom. Except now, the scent of fresh toner and new carpet cleaner filled the space. Her old quilt, the blue one she made with James the winter Neil was born, was missing from the bed. There wasn't a bed anymore, just a desk. White, minimal, 2 monitors, a fake ficus, a corkboard with color-coded sticky notes. Where her dresser once stood, there was now a standing file cabinet labeled Q1 to Q4 planning. In the corner, stacked neatly, sat 4 translucent bins filled with her folded sweaters, her gardening books, and the ceramic angel Neil gave her for Mother's Day in '96. Dana appeared in the doorway behind her, holding a mug that said, Arc Girl Boss. She didn't flinch. Oh, meant to tell you, she said, breezing past Ellie to drop a notebook on the new desk. We really needed the space. I assumed you'd be fine downstairs for now. For now? Ellie repeated softly. Dana didn't pause. You said it was temporary, right? You're feeling better and the recliner's good for your knee. She took a sip from the mug and turned to go. Plus, the den gets great morning light. Ellie didn't respond. Her eyes lingered on the plastic bins, neatly labeled, sealed like storage in someone else's garage. Her name wasn't on any of them. That night, the den felt smaller. The chair creaked every time she shifted. She'd placed her flashlight on the small end table beside her, along with a glass of water and a folded copy of Tenant Wright's Midwestern Region she'd printed at the library. The recliner was brown leather, well worn, once a gift from Neil for James. Back then, it sat proudly in the living room. Now it groaned beneath her bones, like it resented being reassigned. Neil peeked in briefly. Hey, Mom. You okay? Ellie nodded, adjusting the quilt around her shoulders. He hesitated. The chair is probably better for your back anyway, right? Flatbeds can be rough after surgery. Right, she echoed, not unkindly, just quiet. He gave a half smile and closed the door. Over the next 3 nights, Ellie sat in her recliner, with a flashlight, highlighter, and sticky notes, studying the trust James had left behind. She made notes on legal terms, revocable clauses, undue burden, occupant reclassification. Then, buried in a footnote under hostile occupancy adjustments, she found it, the grantor may reclaim control of property if the occupants exhibit emotional hostility, financial imbalance, or undue displacement of the original owner. Ellie didn't smile, but she sat up straighter. She read it twice more, then reached for her glasses. The next morning, Dana was on a Zoom call in the guest room. She's still here, she said. It's just for now. I think she knows not to complicate things. Ellie sat in the kitchen, buttering toast in silence. That night, she added her notes to a manila folder, highlighted clause, photos of her boxed up things, and one line underlined in red. Trust may be dissolved in case of hostile occupancy. Ellie underlines one sentence. Trust may be dissolved in case of hostile occupancy. The trust can be retracted under undue burden and emotional hostility clauses. The kitchen labels now read Snacks for Us and Grandma's Shelf. The labels appeared on a Wednesday. Ellie opened the pantry to retrieve her morning oatmeal and found a white sticker typed, laminated, smug. It read Grandma's Shelf. Just below it sat one lonely can of chicken soup, a box of store-brand cereal, and half a sleeve of saltines. The shelf above was labeled Snacks for Us, filled with granola bars, gourmet popcorn, and trail mix in shiny resealable bags. She blinked, closed the door, then opened the fridge. There, too, a strip of tape across the bottom drawer, Ellie's produce, a lone cucumber, and a bag of carrots. The crisper above teemed with berries, pre-cut mango, and imported cheese, each resting smugly on crisp parchment. At breakfast, Dana hummed while stirring creamer into her coffee. Thought this might help us stay organized, she said cheerfully without looking up. Neil didn't comment. He just nodded, swiping through his phone. Later that afternoon, Ellie stood by the sink, rinsing her teacup. Through the open kitchen window, she heard Dana laughing with the neighbor from across the street. Marcy, the one who always wore too much perfume and called everyone sweetie. She loves the kitchen, Dana said, voice theatrical. We let her play chef sometimes, keeps her busy. Play chef. Ellie dried the cup, set it in the dish rack with care. When Neil got home, he walked past her to the living room. Hey, Mom, he called over his shoulder. If Carly and the kids drop by tomorrow, would you mind giving them space? Just, staying in your room or taking a walk or something. They don't really know you yet. I see, she said quietly, though he had already turned on the TV. The next morning, Ellie walked 2 miles to the old post office downtown, the one where she used to sort mail and smile at every grumpy clerk on Christmas Eve. The building had been renovated, but the bones were the same: brick, purposeful, dignified. A former coworker, Carla, still worked the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw Ellie. My goodness, Carla said, stepping from behind the counter. It's been ages, you okay? Ellie smiled, small and careful. Just needed some air. Carla stepped back, studying her. You look like you've disappeared. Ellie didn't answer, but she nodded. They stood in silence a moment before Ellie left, the bell on the door tinkling like a quiet reminder she'd once had a place that was hers. That evening, she returned home to find Dana had rearranged the pantry again. I moved a few things around, Dana said from the dining room. Hope that's okay. Just trying to make room for what we actually use. What we actually use. Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she walked calmly into her room, the recliner den hybrid, and opened the side drawer beneath her folders. From beneath a tangle of stationery and a clipped recipe for lemon cookies, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The edges were worn from handling. The top corner was marked in red ink. Notice to reclaim ownership, draft 1. It wasn't filed yet, but the tone was clear, calm, legal, assertive. She'd typed it weeks ago after reading the trust clause again. She'd even had it quietly reviewed by the woman who replaced her at the library, now studying estate law part-time. The language had been sharpened, the timeline set. Ellie traced the words with her fingertip, not to memorize them, she already had, but to feel them, paper as armor, a reminder that even silence can be a strategy. Ellie pulls a folded paper from her purse, notice to reclaim ownership, draft. Dana says, You're lucky to still have a roof. I reply, You're lucky I built it. The confrontation began in the laundry room, where most modern wars do. Ellie had just finished folding a stack of towels, each one frayed at the edges, but still warm from the dryer. The scent of lavender detergent clung to the fabric. She reached for the fabric softener lid when Dana appeared in the doorway like a windless storm. You didn't clean the stovetop yesterday, Dana said flatly. Her voice had that practiced softness that made harsh words sound palatable, and the mail's still piled up. Ellie didn't flinch. She folded the last towel, smoothed it, and stacked it neatly. I wasn't aware I was on a chore rotation, she replied mildly. Dana gave a tight smile. Well, we all pitch in, Ellie. That's how shared space works. I mean, you're lucky to still have a roof. Ellie turned slowly. She met Dana's eyes with a stillness honed from years behind a librarian's desk, where unruly teenagers and overdue borrowers had learned the power of pause. You're lucky I built it, Ellie said. Dana blinked, then laughed. But it was the kind of laugh people give when they don't know what else to do with the silence pressing in. Oh, come on, she said. Don't be dramatic. I'm not, Ellie said. But I am keeping receipts now, just in case drama becomes evidence. The words hovered in the air, too polite to be a threat, too measured not to be one. That night, after Dana and Neil retreated to their room, Ellie sat alone in the den with the lamp on low. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Her knees ached, but her hands were steady. She pulled out her old contact list, the one she hadn't touched since the library's final budget meeting. Second from the bottom was a name she hadn't said aloud in years, Clara Levins, J.D., now in estate law. She had once cataloged large print biographies in the back room and brought lemon bars every Wednesday. Ellie dialed. A sleepy voice answered, Clara Levins speaking. It's Eleanor Brooks, Ellie said gently, from Eastwood Library. I need to ask you something privately. There was a pause, then Clara's tone shifted, warm and alert. Ellie, she said. Of course. What's going on? They spoke for 23 minutes. Ellie explained everything, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of a woman who'd spent her life explaining things to people who didn't read the fine print. She laid out the situation like a puzzle: the house deed, the trust structure, the grocery lists, the bedroom taken, the shelf labeled, the jokes whispered when they thought she was out of earshot. When she finished, Clara didn't rush to respond. There's precedent, she said carefully. Not common, but it exists. Hostile residency, coercion, under the guise of care, especially if there's property involved and proof of contribution. Ellie closed her eyes. There is. I have to be honest, it's not easy to pursue. Courts tend to default to family loyalty, unless it's egregious. Ellie smiled faintly. That's fine, she said. I'm not aiming for short. She hung up and stared out the window at the streetlights washing the wet pavement in gold. In her lap, she held the notebook, the one with dates and names. She flipped to the latest page, March 17th. You're lucky to still have a roof. Mail complaint, stove complaint. Dana's tone, dismissive, clipped. Neil, silent. She underlined that last part twice. The next morning, Dana passed her in the hallway and said nothing. Ellie didn't mind. Some women speak loudly, others file. That evening, Ellie poured tea into her favorite mug, flipped to the next blank page in her notebook, and whispered, We begin. I made a list of everything I gave them. Not one item has my name on it now. Ellie opened the hallway closet with the slow reverence of someone entering a church. Inside, a cardboard box sat slumped beneath winter coats that no longer fit anyone in the house. Her hand, still steady despite the swelling in her knuckles, lifted the box onto the dining table. The tape gave way with a dry hiss. Inside, fragments of a life no one else seemed to remember. The photo albums came first, worn leather, corners softened by time. Ellie flipped through them gently, Neil in a paper crown, Dana grinning at their wedding, James in flannel holding a shelf they built. She photographed each page quietly. Across the room, Dana labeled a flower jar. Maybe think about what you actually need, she said. Ellie didn't respond, just kept snapping photos. Next came the heirloom jewelry box. Inside, corsage ribbons, a 1974 library card, and a note from James, You hold this house together, L. Click. Later, in the den, Ellie packed her old journal. The last entry read, Dana labeled the spice rack today. Ours in Grandma's shelf, as if paprika belongs to the young. She placed it in a canvas bag. As she sealed a box marked, Personal, do not open, Neil passed by. You boxing things up already? He asked. Ellie didn't answer, but she was. Ellie looked at him, expression unreadable. Just organizing, she said. He rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe it's time we all moved on? The words landed like cold water, not shouted, just dropped, careless. Ellie gave a small nod and returned to her taping. He lingered as if expecting her to argue, to say something sharp or maternal or forgiving. She didn't. He left. That evening, Ellie stood in the garage. She turned on the overhead light and took a photo of the rafters where James had once scrolled his initials and the year they'd finished insulating the space, JB plus EB 1991. She remembered the way he kissed her forehead after they'd hung the last panel, both of them sweaty and grinning. Her phone clicked once, memory preserved. The next morning was a gray watercolor sky, flat clouds suspended like breath. Ellie dressed deliberately, navy slacks, cream sweater, the good coat with the copper buttons. She placed the journal, the photos, the heirloom file folder, and the house trust documents into her black leather tote. At the door, Dana called out, "Groceries today, remember, if you're going out." Ellie paused, then turned. "I won't be gone long." Dana didn't reply. The county clerk's office smelled like old laminate and lemon polish. A ceiling fan stirred warm air overhead. Ellie waited quietly in line, hands resting on the tote. When her turn came, she stepped up to the counter and handed over her ID and a thin folder. "I need to initiate a clause review," she said. "Property held in trust under a survivorship stipulation." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Do you have the original deed?" Ellie pulled out a plastic sleeve, slid it across the counter. "And legal cause?" She nodded. "Undue burden, emotional hostility." The clerk clicked her keyboard. "You'll need to sign and date these forms and we'll open a formal review." "I know," Ellie said, her voice calm, certain. "Please proceed." As she left the office, a copy of the filed receipt tucked under her arm, Ellie whispered to herself, "Let's see who really owns the silence now." It was taped to the fridge. 3 items were crossed out. The last one read dignity. The paper was taped crooked, as if in a rush. Ellie spotted it first thing in the morning, fluttering slightly from the fridge like a flag planted on unfamiliar land. 3 pages again, lined, neat, and punctuated with bullet points and little hearts. Dana must have thought softened the edges. Almond milk, unsweetened. Scrubbing pads, not cheap kind. Dignity. The last item wasn't really there, not in ink, but Ellie saw it anyway, felt it scrolled in the margin of every demand. She stood in her house slippers, mug of cooling tea in hand, and read the list line by line. Toiletries, cleaning supplies, seasonal produce, organic if possible, 2 kinds of protein powder, vitamins she didn't take, cookies for the kids, air. Freshener refills. Halfway down the second page, her hand lowered slowly to her side. Behind her, Dana's voice floated from the stairs. "I left it for you last night. Should be enough for the week. I even added brand names so there's no confusion." Ellie turned her head, but not her body. "Thank you for the clarity." Dana didn't detect the chill. "And maybe skip the canned soup this time, unless it's low sodium." Neil's watching his blood pressure. The footsteps retreated before Ellie could offer the reply, resting at the back of her tongue. Instead of heading to the grocery store, Ellie drove past it, past the second stoplight, past the same church whose pews once held her grief the day they buried James. Her car, slow but steady, turned into the parking lot of Vittman's office supply, where the sign had faded to a whisper and the air always smelled like toner and dust. She walked to the back, chose the thickest pen she could find, then stood in front of a revolving rack marked Forms and Legal Pads. Her fingers closed around a packet labeled 30-day notice to vacate, tenant copy. She bought 2. Dinner was chilly, canned, low sodium. She made it anyway. The table was quiet. Forks clinked. Neil scrolled his phone. The children were with Dana's sister, which made the air feel more fragile than usual. Halfway through the meal, Ellie reached into her purse and placed a folded sheet of paper on Neil's placemat. She didn't say anything, just sipped her water and waited. He glanced down at it without concern, then lifted the paper and unfolded it. A beat passed, then another, his brow furrowed. "What?" Dana looked up from her bowl, sensing the shift. Neil's voice sharpened. You're giving us a notice? Ellie smiled warmly, as if she'd handed over a recipe instead. Technically, she said, folding her napkin in half, I'm giving it to the tenant. Dana's spoon froze midair. Neil blinked. What are you talking about? Ellie tilted her head. You live here, Neil, but I own the deed. Still, as it turns out. There was a pause so deep it silenced the hum of the refrigerator. You're serious, Dana said, her voice flat, eyes narrowing. Ellie stood, gathering her plate with both hands. I'll leave you to read it in full, she said. Page 2 has the effective date, but just so you're not surprised, today counts as day 1. She walked her bowl to the sink, rinsed it gently, left it in the rack to dry. Behind her, paper rustled, chairs scraped, and the walls held their breath, bracing for a sound that never came. Ellie turned off the kitchen light. Neil followed her to the hallway. You can't be serious. Ellie looked at him calmly, then nodded toward the fridge. Neither is almond milk worth rent. And yet, here we are. They invited me to a family dinner. I wore black. It felt fitting. The invitation came through a group text. Not from Neil, not from Dana, from their shared number, like a public service announcement. Dinner tonight, just us, 6 p.m. Thought we could talk. Ellie stared at the message for a moment before setting her phone down. Her hands moved without thought, ironing the black blouse she usually saved for funerals. She wore it that night anyway, tucked in at the sleeves, pressed at the collar. It didn't matter if it was morbid. It felt honest. The dining table had been set with cloth napkins and flickering candles that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Dana's idea of elevated casual. Neil stood by the open wine bottle, trying for charm. Mom, he said with an uneasy smile. Thanks for coming down. As if I had somewhere else to be, Ellie replied, lowering herself into the chair that used to be hers, now nudged slightly off-center. They ate salad with roasted beets and walnut crumbles, a recipe from one of Dana's blog posts Ellie recognized. For a moment, no one said anything that wasn't about vinaigrette. Then Dana placed her fork down and folded her napkin slowly, deliberately. So about the notice, Ellie. Ellie didn't look up from her plate. Yes? Dana glanced at Neil, then back. We were thinking maybe we all overreacted. Things have gotten tense. Obviously, we've all said things we didn't mean. Neil added, We want to move forward, Mom. But that depends on both sides. Trying. Ellie finally looked up. Trying what exactly? Dana offered a smile so tight it could have been stapled on. Let's say we let the whole tenant thing go. A pause hung like a hook. If you're willing to apologize for how out of hand this got. It's been stressful for all of us. Ellie blinked slowly. She reached beneath the table and retrieved a folded envelope from her purse. Wordlessly, she laid it on the table. Inside were 6 weeks' worth of grocery receipts, color-coded, categorized, and totaled. She didn't need to say what they were. Dana's lips parted, then closed again. Neil picked one up and squinted. Why are you showing us these? To remind you what free rent really looked like, Ellie replied. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was cold, in the way a bank vault is cold. You asked for an apology. I brought math. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was enlightening. A knock came at the door before anyone could respond. Ellie stood first. I'll get it. It was Joyce, her old friend from the library board. A kind face with years in the eyes and hands that always held warmth. Oh, Ellie, am I early? No, Ellie said. You're right on time. Joyce stepped in and took in the scene. Neil still holding a receipt, Dana's glass trembling slightly, the half-finished plates, the eucalyptus flickering like a failing promise. Well, Joyce said later, when they sat on the back porch, away from earshot, that didn't feel like a dinner. That felt like a send-off. Ellie sipped her lukewarm tea. That's what it was, just not mine. Joyce patted her hand. This isn't cohabitation, honey. It's slow eviction dressed in dinner parties. Inside, Dana turned up the volume on the dishwasher cycle. Neil was still rereading numbers like they might change. That night, back in her room, the recliner den Ellie now referred to as the waiting room, she pulled out her wall calendar, a gift from the public library fundraiser, each month printed with quotes from female authors. She turned to the current page. A quote from Audre Lorde stared back at her. "Your silence will not protect you." Ellie uncapped her pen, drew a bold circle around day 15. She didn't write anything inside the circle. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind shook the blinds. Ellie let it rattle. 27 days left. Enough time for a slow goodbye or a faster beginning. A young couple admired the kitchen. I smiled and said, "The walls remember who paid for them." The real estate agent pulled in at 11:30 a.m. sharp. Ellie stood ready at the door, blouse pressed, candle lit, blinds open to the sharp truth of morning light. "Thanks for allowing private showings," the agent whispered. "They always had ears," Ellie replied. The first couple arrived soon after, young, polite, eager. "It's beautiful," the woman said, touching the banister. "How long have you lived here?" "Since 1983, Ellie answered. "I paid for every inch, raised my son here, laid the first tile myself." "Oh, so you're the seller?" the woman asked. "I am," Ellie said, then softer, "also listed as a temporary occupant, but not for much longer." They nodded. They didn't ask. Some truths fill a house like dust, felt, not spoken. The tour moved through the kitchen. Dana's magnetic whiteboard still hung near the fridge, scribbled with weekly meals and notes about almond milk and kids' snacks. Ellie didn't remove it. Let them see what modern hospitality looked like. The woman opened a pantry cabinet. "Was this reconfigured recently?" "No," Ellie said. "That shelf labeled Grandma's Snacks. That was my shelf until I decided I wanted more than a shelf." In the living room, a manila folder lay on the coffee table, thick with printed copies of home repair records, warranty receipts, and the appraisal from the month before. Everything legal, clean, verified. The second couple came in around 1 p.m., an older pair from out of town, looking for a place closer to their daughter. The woman stopped in the hallway, eyes catching a framed photo on the wall. "Is that your husband?" "It was," Ellie said. "He built the garden gate in the backyard, said no one should feel boxed in." The woman smiled faintly. "That's a good man." Ellie nodded. "He was." That afternoon, between tours, she stood at the kitchen window, watching the backyard wind shake the rosemary bush. Inside, the silence felt less like exile and more like design. No Dana rustling shopping bags, no Neil pacing between calls, just the sound of her own breath and the quiet creak of the home exhaling its truths. She began documenting more thoroughly than before, snippets of conversations scribbled in her notebook, photos of post-it notes Dana left for her, audio clips of late-night arguing through paper-thin walls. Not for vengeance, for accuracy. That evening, her email pinged. Subject, offer received. 412 Belmont Drive. Body all-cash offer, $47,000 over asking. Contingent upon full vacancy within 30 days. Please advise. Ellie stared at the screen. The cursor blinked in rhythm with her heartbeat. She didn't move, just sat back. The recliner, pressing gently into her spine like it too, was asking for permission to let go. She clicked reply. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a breath, then typed, "Accept." A soft ding came seconds later. Confirmation received. Ellie closed the laptop, walked to her bedroom, and placed the offer letter beneath her pillow. For the first time in months, she slept through the night. The U-Haul wasn't for me, but I watched it fill anyway. The sound of tape snapping echoed through the hallway like a warning, low, rough, and final. Neil was in the garage, wrestling flattened cardboard into boxes Dana had labeled with black Sharpie, fragile, bedroom, media unit, as if bold lettering could cushion what was breaking. From her seat in the den, Ellie sipped her tea, now lukewarm. She didn't warm it again. Instead, she watched the driveway through the sheer curtain. The U-Haul idled in the sun, too large for a weekend trip, too small for denial. A month ago, they were giving her grocery lists. Now they were arguing in hushed tones behind half-closed doors, folding designer throws like they held any warmth. Neil stormed past Ellie, arms full of cords, eyes avoiding hers. Dana followed with a box of books, half of which Ellie had bought Neil as a child. At the doorway, Dana muttered, "This is ridiculous. You really think this makes you look good?" Ellie said nothing. She opened her phone, forwarded a screenshot, date stamped titled Unlawful Occupant Comments. Dana's eyes narrowed. Seriously, a paper trail? Ellie met her gaze, not stalking, reclaiming. Dana left without a word. Boxes piled up, packed with urgency, not care. Ellie didn't interfere. She didn't need to. The walls remembered everything. By noon the next day, the house had grown quieter. Even the fridge hummed louder in the emptier kitchen. Ellie touched the counter, still marked by years of breakfasts and grief. Every chip, every stain told her story. She could still feel the memory of Neil leaning on the pantry door, too young to know the weight he left behind. At one point, Dana tried again, not to apologize, but to threaten. I can still tell my side, she said, standing near the patio door with a phone in her hand, her voice syrupy with suggestion. Public sympathy is quick when you use the right filters. Single mother-in-law ruins family peace. That headline writes itself. Ellie looked up from her crossword. Then spell my name right. And that was it. By the fourth evening, the U-Haul was half full. Dana had moved to texting Neil her complaints, thinking Ellie wouldn't see them. She did. Neil offered less and less, just grunts, averted glances, and one half-hearted, I guess this is what you want. Ellie didn't say what she wanted. She'd already said what she wouldn't tolerate. At dinner, takeout eaten on their laps because the dining table was now boxed. No one spoke. The air was thick with the weight of realization. They'd underestimated her, mistook her kindness for compliance, her quiet for surrender. Afterward, Ellie stood in the hallway as they bustled around, Dana barking orders like a woman scorned by logistics, not consequence, and then finally she turned toward her own room. The bedroom was untouched, peaceful, a space reclaimed. She walked in slowly, fingers brushing the door frame, the light switch, the edge of the nightstand she'd kept all these years. She stepped to the closet, opened it, and pulled out her suitcase. She placed it on the bed, not to pack, but to unzip. Inside, new curtains, a fresh duvet cover in soft sage green, two hardcover books, a hand-sewn pillow she'd ordered online, stitched with the words, "This house knows who it belongs to." She began to redecorate. As she adjusted the pillow, the hum of the U-Haul engine sputtered to a stop outside. She didn't flinch. She simply turned up the radio. Debussy, low and sure, and unzipped the second suitcase. Silence is sweeter when you don't owe anyone an explanation. The silence was a blanket now, not a weight. Ellie stood in the middle of the hallway, barefoot on cool hardwood, the same floors she'd mopped 100 times, though no one thanked her for it. The hum of the refrigerator drifted from the kitchen like white noise, familiar and calming. There was no shouting from upstairs, no passive sighs in passing, no footsteps that paused too long by her door. They were gone. Boxes had disappeared like a fever break-in, gradually then all at once. The U-Haul had coughed its last engine breath before sunset the day before. Neil didn't say goodbye. Dana had left behind a faint trace of perfume and a single bobby pin on the bathroom counter. Ellie didn't pick it up. She let it sit there, gleaming uselessly under the light. Some things are best left unclaimed. She moved through the house slowly, not to mourn, but to breathe, like someone touching the walls of a ship after surviving a storm. The dining table sat bare now, without Dana's centerpiece of eucalyptus that made Ellie sneeze. She ran her fingers along the edge, the groove still there, from when Neil had scraped it with a toy truck 30 years ago. That scratch had once made her furious. Now she touched it like a relic. In the kitchen, the shelves were clean but empty. No more labels, no grandma's shelf, no snacks for us. Ellie reached for a ceramic bowl and placed it on the counter. It was hers. She filled it with clementines, just because she liked the way the color looked against the tile. Then she padded to the living room, where the recliner had lived like a monument to discomfort. It was gone now, donated the same morning to the thrift shop down by the train tracks. In its place stood a proper armchair, wide and deep with a matching footstool, sage green, soft, supportive. The quilt Dana used to call old and itchy now draped gracefully over its arm. Ellie made her way to the bedroom, her bedroom again. The bed had been delivered that morning by a quiet man who tipped his cap and didn't ask questions. She'd tipped him extra. There was something refreshing about transactions that didn't come with judgment. The mattress was firm. The sheets smelled like lavender and a new beginning. She placed a single photo on the nightstand, her and her husband at Lake Erie, wind in their hair, smiles untouched by time. No other pictures made the cut. Just before sunset, Ellie stepped outside and changed the lock. The key clicked smoothly into the new cylinder. She turned it once, twice. Satisfaction bloomed in her chest, not because it locked people out, but because it finally sealed something in. Ownership. Back inside, she sat at the table with a warm cup of tea and watched the way the evening light hit the floor. Motes of dust danced in the air, caught like secrets in motion. The phone rang once. Her agent, they tried to reverse the deal, he said without a greeting. Offered cash, said they'd find a workaround. Ellie didn't even blink. You told them it wasn't about the money? I did, he said. Then, after a pause, softer, You doing all right? I'm doing quiet, she replied. That's better. She hung up. Later that night, she pulled a brand new journal from her drawer. The cover was navy blue, bound in linen, stiff at the edges, like it hadn't yet decided who it belonged to. She opened it, uncapped a pen, wrote only one line on the first page, room to breathe. She set the journal down beside her tea and, for the first time in months, reached for the remote, not to drown anything out, but to play music loud enough to fill the house. Dana posted a long rant. I posted a deed transfer receipt. The post was public. That much Ellie could tell before she even clicked. Dana's Facebook profile photo beamed in its usual filtered way, all white teeth and autumn scarves. But the caption that sat beneath it burned, It's hard when the people you welcome into your home turn around and betray you. Family is supposed to be about care, not contracts. I won't be silent about this. Attached, a dimly lit photo of the empty living room, the couch slightly askew, a single tissue left on the coffee table like a planted tear. Ellie read the caption once, then once more, then closed her laptop and pushed it aside like it might stain the table. The next morning, Neil posted, Being a good son doesn't mean agreeing with everything. Boundaries are healthy. That doesn't make us villains. No names, but in a small town, everyone knew. Ellie's phone buzzed with messages. Thinking of you, Eleanor. She didn't answer. She made tea, calm and focused. Then she pulled out a folded paper, the deed transfer confirmation, scanned it, emailed it to her lawyer, agent, and Dana. Subject, for the record. Later, she uploaded the official property filing to the county clerk's site, then sent the link privately to Dana, no caption. Within hours, the comments on Neil's post shifted. Wait, wasn't that her house? She was a tenant? Bold move complaining from someone else's home. Neil's thread quietly disappeared the next morning, but the inbox didn't. A woman named Tanya, someone Ellie vaguely remembered from her library days, sent a message. I wish I'd had your courage when my son tried something similar. You inspire me. Ellie didn't feel inspiring. She felt exhausted. Still, she saved the message. At noon, her lawyer called. It's starting to turn. The narrative, I mean. Ellie chuckled softly. I didn't write one. Maybe, but you lived it well. She ended the call and spent the next hour pruning the front hedges. The sun warmed her back and caught in the curls of her silver hair. A neighbor slowed as they passed, gave a polite wave, unsure now how to address her. Ellie waved back and kept trimming. When she stepped inside, sweat at the nape of her neck and fingers smelling faintly of rosemary and mulch, she saw the new message notification blinking on her phone. It wasn't from Dana or Neil or any of the circling family trying to patch reputations. It was from a journalist. Hi, Miss Brooks, I've been following the story quietly. We're working on a feature about women reclaiming power in later life. Would you be willing to talk? Ellie set her phone down without answering. She made a sandwich. She swept the kitchen floor. She let the weight of the ask sink in. Not the publicity, but the permission to speak on record. Not just to defend, but to define. She picked the phone back up and typed just one word. Maybe. Do you want to be seen as a villain? The reporter asked. No, I said. I want to be seen. The reporter's notebook was soft leather, corners worn. Her pen clicked once, then again. Ellie could hear it between heartbeats. They sat in the sunlit dining room, now hers again, where a plant curled upward toward the window and the scent of lemon tea hovered between them. Ellie wore her oldest pearls, not for beauty, but for memory. Her late husband had given them to her on their 20th anniversary. She'd worn them to his funeral, and now to this. I want to be very clear, the reporter began, her voice gentle but sharpened by curiosity. This story's going to get attention. Ellie folded her hands around her teacup. So did the grocery list. The reporter blinked once and smiled. Let's start there. They talked for an hour, no cameras, just words. Ellie told her about the den chair, the way Dana's voice turned sugary when company came, how Neil started calling her Mom less and her more. She described the labels on the pantry, the passive instructions tucked into breakfast conversations, and how it felt to walk into a room that once held her marriage and find it turned into a printer station. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, Ellie said. I just stopped agreeing to disappear. The reporter nodded, pen scratching across the page. What do you hope people get from this? Ellie looked out the window. Wind pressed gently against the garden gate. That surviving quietly isn't the same as being silent. 3 days later, the article went live. Headline: Retired Librarian Reclaims Dignity, One Clause at a Time. Subhead: How Eleanor Brooks Turned a Quiet Eviction into a Quiet Revolution. Ellie only skimmed it, fair, firm, careful, then went for a walk. By evening, her inbox overflowed. Messages poured in from across the country. I thought I was the only one. You helped me feel sane. I'm buying a folder like yours. One handwritten letter from Vermont read, You reminded me who I was before they called me burdensome. Ellie tucked that one into her recipe book. She created a new folder labeled Kindness and filled it with every note and clipping, not for proof, but for remembering. She declined all media offers, except one. When the reporter returned, no notebook in hand, they gave her a small brown parcel. What's this? Ellie asked. Proof. The reporter smiled. At home, Ellie opened it carefully, her fingers brushing against bubble wrap and brown paper. Inside was a black frame. Behind glass, the article's headline, printed on heavy stock, with a note scrolled across the bottom in a permanent ink. Thank you for showing us that dignity doesn't yell, it stands. Ellie ran a finger along the edge of the glass. Her reflection stared back. Calm, silver-haired, unapologetic. She set it on the mantel and then turned because someone was knocking at the door. I didn't burn the grocery lists. I filed them. Then I lit a candle. The wind moved gently that morning as Ellie stood by her husband's grave, gloved hand resting on the granite. She pulled out a folder with 3 old grocery lists. I kept them, she said quietly, so I wouldn't forget the difference between help and expectation. A pause. We're back home now, Tom. They packed everything that was theirs and nothing that was mine. 2 weeks later, her kitchen was full of warmth. Her book club, 6 women over 60, each with her own survival story, gathered around her new oak table. Laughter mingled with the scent of cinnamon rooibos. Ellie lit a small candle, the same one she'd lit after filing away the last list. Any thoughts on the book? Someone asked. Ellie raised her tea. To living on your own terms. 6 cups clinked in quiet solidarity. The knock came just after the women left. 3 soft taps, polite, rehearsed. She knew before she opened the door. Dana stood on the porch. No coat, no grocery bag, just the same practiced smile she used when trying to borrow authority. Her hair was curled too perfectly. Her hands clasped at her waist like she was trying to appear smaller than she'd ever tried to be before. I was just in the neighborhood, Dana said, eyes darting past Ellie's shoulder. Thought I might drop by. Ellie didn't move from the doorway. Dana tried again. I heard about the article and the club. Sounds like you've been busy. I have, Ellie replied. Silence stretched. I didn't come to argue, Dana said. Just thought maybe we could talk, clear the air, start fresh. Ellie tilted her head slightly. Her voice remained even. You're standing on a welcome mat that no longer applies. Dana blinked. This isn't your address anymore, Ellie added. Not harsh, not triumphant, just final. Dana's mouth opened, then shut again. Her shoulders straightened, but not enough to restore whatever posture she thought she still had. Ellie waited. Eventually, Dana nodded once and turned away, shoes clicking too loudly against the stone path. The wind picked up again, scattering a few loose leaves across the porch as if sweeping it clean. Inside, Ellie refilled her teacup, the scent of cinnamon stronger now, mingling with the faint lavender from the sachets she'd tucked into the windowsill. She sat by the glass, her knees wrapped in the old quilt she'd once been given as a wedding gift. She didn't post online. She didn't share the encounter. She simply watched the breeze move across the garden beds, still bare but ready for spring. One of the book club women had promised her tomato seedlings by May. Another was bringing iris bulbs next week. Her phone buzzed once, a message from her lawyer. All titles clear, final filings confirmed. She didn't reply. She set the phone down, lifted her tea, and stared out the window, finally completely undisturbed.